Questions persist over personal expenditures made by Congressman Duncan Hunter of Alpine, who spent campaign funds on personal items. In a lively KPBS debate, frontrunner Kamala Harris came under attack from 4 other would-be U.S. senators. And state regulators may come to the rescue of ratepayers as they reopen the multi-billion-dollar San Onofre settlement. I'm Mark Sauer. The KPBS Roundtable starts now. Welcome to our discussion of the week's top stories. I'm Mark Sauer. And joining me at the KPBS Roundtable today, our reporter Morgan Cook, member of the San Diego Union Tribune's Watchdog team. Hi, Morgan.
Hi.
Good to have you here today. KPBS investigative reporter Amitha Sharma. Hi, Amitha.
Hi, Mark.
Glad to have you back. And Ricky Young, editor of the UT's Watchdog team. Hi, Ricky.
Hey, Mark.
Well, questions persist on how Congressman Duncan Hunter has been using his campaign account for personal expenses, which is forbidden by federal law. The Alpine Republican is, of course, running for re-election. All congressmen run again every 2 years. And we'll get into the impact of what this might have as an election issue. But, Morgan, start with these expenditures. What's the UT found? What's the nature of them generally, and what were they using these for?
Well, the things that he's self-identified as personal or mistaken expenditures and reimbursed so far, there's about $12,000. And they include, oral surgery, a new garage door, things that you don't typically see.
Yeah, surf shops,
video
Jack
games,
in the Box,
video
trips.
Games, surf shops, things
groceries
like that.
and that sort of thing,
Yes.
and trips. And you're not supposed to and do that. And we'll get into the legal ramifications about that. But the total is, as you say, about $12,000 that he's reimbursed so far. And so far, how about the expenditures themselves, or do we even know the extent of how many of these have been commingled on the campaign?
We know the ones that he's self-identified, and then we had a look at sort of patterns, big picture, and a little bit of deep digging of specific things, and we found more things that could easily be personal expenditures because they're so unlike the rest of the delegations.
Okay, so stuff that a suburban family would be typically buying.
Right, groceries.
Trip after trip to Jack in the Box and Albertsons and Trader Joe's and
Fill up the family car.
Chevron. Just things you don't expect to see on a congressional campaign. Like it's not a yard sign or something. It's things that look like spending by a suburban family. And Morgan looked through, Susan Davis and Scott Peters and others, and there's
other local members of Congress.
They're not doing these kinds of expenses.
So Morgan, what are the rules of these kinds of expenditures, and what are the consequences?
Well, the rules are that you can't use your campaign money for the benefit of any single person. Or for any purposes that would exist if they were not running the campaign, right? So you're going to have to pay your water bill regardless of...
On your own, out of your own personal...
Even if your campaign is operating in your house, you're going to have to pay your water bill. Okay. And so, you can't spend your campaign money for that. And
all these routine expenses. Now, you said he did reimburse up to the tune of $12,000 so far, but how does his office account for these expenditures over time?
Well,
I mean, how does he say this happened? There was something about the son mistakenly using a credit card.
Right. So the story came, to our attention because the Federal Elections Commission questioned all of these. There were dozens of expenditures for video games for this video game company called Steam Games, and so we asked about it, and he said that his son had taken his credit card. He'd gone to use his credit card to sign up for this online streaming video game company. And he had taken the wrong credit card. Apparently it's blue, and so are some of the other credit cards in his wallet.
Okay, well, that accounts for some video games then. But as we listed here at the outset, it's far beyond that. I mean, it certainly does look like a pattern here that we really aren't abiding by the rules.
They offered these kinds of explanations initially. Oh, well, the cards are blue, so he made a little mistake there. And then there were allegedly some fraud, like they put the credit card in, and then suddenly there were a bunch of other charges that the son didn't put through. And so we got these kinds of explanations early on, but more recently they've declined to explain. For instance, they spent more than $200 at a gift shop in Disneyland that they put, on their campaign forms, signed under penalty of perjury, were food and beverages. Well, Morgan called up to the gift shop, and the only food and beverages they sell are Pez and a Star Wars themed Rice Krispie treat.
Okay,
so unlikely they spent $229 on
those
Pez,
couple items,
unless somebody's really got a sweet tooth.
Right.
So, but they won't explain that expense to us. There's a surf shop in Coronado where they spent $300. They won't tell us what that was for. They sort of generally say it was for some sort of event, but we don't know what the event was. Was this a community event or a campaign event? So the explanations have sort of stopped coming, and presumably they're answering to the FEC, but I don't know how many of these things the FEC is actually looking into.
Yeah, Morgan?
Well, I was just going to say that the Disneyland purchase, is a little, it causes me a little more concern because there also has been an expenditure for food reported for as food and beverage that turned out to be a jewelry store in Florence, Italy, and they also don't sell food.
They don't even sell Pez there.
They don't even sell Pez.
So how much was the charge at the jewelry store in Italy?
That was, I think, $217, and then Disneyland was $229. So that's an awful lot of Pez.
Well, let's talk for a moment about the political implications here. Now, Duncan Hunter, of course, has served several terms as father. Duncan Hunter Sr. had served many terms before that. This is a real brand name, political name out there in East County. Is this going to have any impact? That's a pretty red district, a pretty Republican district, right?
Yeah, it is. And, his opponents have brought it up, and I think that voters in his district are somewhat alarmed, but he won with a huge percentage of the vote the last time, maybe like
2 years ago.
Yeah, about
in the 70% range. Huh?
Right. And so, I think it would take a lot.
Tough to make
Yeah.
inroads. Ricky, what sort of response are your stories getting from readers and comments on the comment page?
Yeah, well, normally there's a fair amount of balance in the comments and responses we get, but I mean, pretty universally, people think these kinds of expenses are, questionable at best. There have been calls for him to resign. But importantly, out of balance, Morgan in her stories has called donors to Hunter's campaign, who of course are the major stakeholders for this thing, right? Because they're the ones who gave the money. They should be the measure of how it should be spent.
Yeah.
And they all say they believe these are honest mistakes. Duncan's a good guy, and he'll take care of it.
We should note a couple of odd things. His wife, Margaret, is involved in the operation of his campaign and its management, right?
Yes, she has been his campaign manager. And apparently there were only 2 holders of the campaign credit card during the time that these expenditures took place. One was Representative Hunter, and the other one was his wife, Margaret, who is also his campaign manager. And as far as I understand, his campaign is a really small shop. We're talking about a couple people. Them and the treasurer, basically.
Doesn't need a big one in a safe district like that.
Right. So, the personal use question is...
He made it publicly known that after the first stories broke, only one person held the credit card, and that was him.
Okay.
So basically, he told the public he's taken the wife's credit card away. And some people saw that as...
But it's not the wife's credit card.
Well, true. But her copy of the campaign credit card.
Yeah.
And some people saw that as sort of throwing her under the bus.
Now, ultimately, are there criminal charges possible in something like this? Or do they just say, shouldn't do that, please change your ways?
I think that it definitely depends on whether or not it was knowing and willful. Was there the intent to embezzle campaign money? Were they like, oh, cool, campaign money, let's use it, at Jiffy Lube or whatever? Or was it, some kind of series of mistakes, miscommunications, and things like that? And so if the FEC thinks that there was intent there,
Federal Elections Commission,
right, yes, they might refer it to the Department of Justice. Or the Department of Justice might have a look and be like, this looks like someone with subpoena power should check it out.
Okay.
And there is that Senate candidate in Delaware who...
yes, Christine O'Donnell. I'm sorry, Christine O'Donnell. Yeah, she had this issue where she was renting a townhouse and her campaign was operating out of it. She was living there and the campaign was operating, and she's paying for utilities and that is, as we discussed earlier, forbidden.
Yeah, some of these can fall in a gray area, but they're very explicit about the utilities. So that may be his biggest problem is the money to SDG&E and the Padre Dam Water District apparently for his home in Alpine.
All right, well, we'll see. I'm sure we'll be following up on this and seeing more reporting as this does play out. We're going to move on now. Kamala Harris was under attack from the outset at the debate this week here at KPBS. The Democrat and frontrunner in the race to replace U.S. Senator Barbara Boxer traded blows with 4 challengers throughout the lively hour-long session. Here's an example from Republican Duff Sundheim.
She has repeatedly shown that she will always side with her donors, even if she's taking on people that are the most vulnerable amongst us. She's in the pocket of her donors.
So, Mitha, you moderated this debate. Were you surprised how stridently they came after her compared with the first debate and this one?
I think, if you want to compare the 2 debates, in the first one, the Republican candidates, at least some of them, went after Democratic Congresswoman Loretta Sanchez. In this one, as you said, right out the gate, they pretty much piled on Attorney General Kamala Harris. So in his opening statements, Duff Sundheim accused the Attorney General for being responsible for a 34% increase in crime, which he has since walked back. He said that he misread the press release and it wasn't actually a 34% increase in crime. She responded in turn in her opening statements by just ticking off a list of all of her accomplishments, bringing home $20 billion to the state of California as a settlement with the banks during the foreclosure crisis back in 2008. She said that, she had fought transnational gangs, for such things as drug smuggling and human trafficking. And she talked about standing up for a woman's right to choose. Now, Duff Sundheim came back later and, said that, look, Kamala Harris took funding to remove guns from people who shouldn't have them, criminals and other people with mental disabilities. She came back and said, people should get their facts straight. Her office has been responsible for taking guns from at least 10 million guns away from people. So there was a piling on. She was able to fend all of the attacks off. At least from my vantage point where I was standing, she very much was in command of the stage. She was very, very clear in what she was going to say and how she was going to respond to what the others were saying.
So
she seemed very, very unflappable.
And minimum wage was an issue that came up and they were kicking around pretty good?
Well, all of them have some interesting positions on minimum wage. Ron Unz, who's a Republican, is in favor of an increase in the minimum wage, not quite $15, but he's in favor of an increase. Duff Sundheim, he's a Republican. He talks about income inequality a great deal. So this is your California U.S. Senate race. This is not reflective of the rest of the country.
Blue California Republicans.
Right.
Yeah. We do have a bite here from Kamala Harris on the minimum wage issue.
I absolutely support the $15 an hour minimum wage law. Federal minimum wage right now is $7.25 an hour. That's less than $15,000 a year. 2/3 of minimum wage workers are women. So if she's a mom trying to keep a roof over the head and food on the table, she's probably holding down 2 jobs. That means she's not spending a whole lot of time with those children that she actually wants to spend more time with. But because she has to feed them, she's got to work 2 jobs. We've got to change the system.
All right, so she had quite a bit to say about that. Another issue was climate change. How did the candidates come down on that? And was there a non-believer up there?
There was a non-believer, and he is a physicist. His name is Ron Unz. He said that he's not convinced by the evidence on climate change. He said, look, in fact, our colleague at KQED, Scott Schaefer, had done a story the previous day that ran on our radio station, and he said, look, there's all this differing research on it, and it's hard to basically make a decision on what the facts are.
That's pretty much a cockamamie view, especially in California.
Which Scott Schaefer, he pointed out that some of the research is funded by the fossil fuel industry and by conservative think tanks, and then you have well-respected scientists who are responsible for the other research. So that's a bit of an anomaly. I mean, Ron Unz is a very smart guy. He's a very thoughtful guy, a very prolific writer. That was something that really stood out in the debate.
All right, we've got another bite we're going to put out here, and it is on this topic. Loretta Sanchez from Orange County on climate change and greenhouse gases.
Well, I will say that I have 20 years in the Congress of defending the environmental rights of our citizenry. I have a 100% voting record on the environment. We need to fight greenhouse gas emissions.
Now, some of the folks in the analysis that I've read and we all took a look at after the debate said that this was a kind of an uneven performance here. She's talking kind of oddly there, it seems, at a moment.
Well, I don't have any inside information on this, but for those of us who watched the first debate last month in Stockton, Congresswoman Sanchez was extremely animated. You know, she has a different speaking style, and she says things off the cuff. She is a shoot from the hip type of person. I think that her handlers, her image people said, you might want to tamp down things.
Tone it down for
right.
this one, huh?
Right. And so I think she did, but perhaps she went to the other extreme. At times it seemed like she was talking to a school, like a second grade class, where she, you know, sort of made these gestures and spoke, you know, she enunciated very clearly. It was interesting. She was asked a question again by our colleague Scott Schaefer about her 2005 vote to limit liability for gun makers. And she didn't really answer the question. I mean, she said that she has great support from the Brady campaign, which is a anti-gun group. So her performance was kind of all over the map.
Now, Kamala Harris still way ahead in the polls here. And
she is. I mean, she's the one. This is her race to lose.
But it will be a runoff.
It will be
You'll
a
have
runoff.
top two
So
vote.
California has that unusual system where the two top vote getters, regardless of party,
Could be the same party.
will face off in November. It is likely, highly likely, that it will be Kamala Harris and Loretta Sanchez. Kamala Harris, there was a USC poll that came out in April. She was at 28%. Loretta Sanchez was at 19%. Then there was a field poll that showed that Kamala Harris was at, I believe, 27%, and Sanchez was at 14%, and the Republicans are in the single digits.
All right, still a lot undecided. We do have one more clip before we leave this topic. It's Duff Sondheim hammering Kamala Harris about the criminal investigation into San Onofre, which we're going to talk about the next topic.
There's very serious charges that were raised by KPBC talking about the Public Utility Commission and possible criminal conduct that was found by one of her investigators in her office. But since that person was politically connected, the statute of limitations was allowed to pass on that, and now we're going to be left holding up to a $3 billion bill.
I think he means KPCC there. What did she have to say about that?
I think he means KPBS.
Well, I think he was talking about the Bay Area report.
So, I'm sorry, what was your question?
How did she respond to what he was saying about?
She said that she hadn't let the statute of limitations run out. We did a story a couple of weeks ago, and I was on this program to talk about it. The statute of limitations for the most serious allegation that's outlined in the search warrant affidavit in her criminal investigation into the San Onofre settlement agreement is the obstruction of justice issue, and that statute has run out.
Okay. All right. I'm sure we'll see more between now and the June 7th primary, but let's shift now to San Onofre here. After 18 months of sharp criticism, state regulators this week finally reacted, that is, by reopening the settlement for the premature shutdown of the San Onofre nuclear plant. That was the deal that stuck ratepayers with most of the multi-billion-dollar cost. And Ricky, start with that settlement. It was announced in 2014. How did that break down back then?
Yeah, so if about $4.7 billion in cost for the premature shutdown. This is not the full decommissioning cost, but just the cost of the failure that caused the shutdown, $4.7 billion. and ratepayers, that is customers of the utilities, are on the hook to pay $3.3 billion of that, about 70% of the cost.
So the bulk of that, certainly. Now, that settlement was unanimously approved by the California Public Utilities Commission at the time. The ratepayer group TURN also threw the holy water on it, and it's come under scrutiny ever since. Why?
Well, yeah, that was in November 2014. They passed it. At the time, this investigation Amitha was just talking about was just starting. And was not really all that well known publicly. Then in January of 2015, Jeff McDonald of our staff, who couldn't be here today, and that's why I'm here, was covering a search warrant from that investigation and noticed on there something that said RSG notes, which is the replacement steam generator from San Onofre. And we kind of made a big deal about that. The PUC had been under investigation for its ties to utility companies, mostly focused, though, around Pacific Gas and Electric and the deadly pipeline blast in San Bruno. This was the first indication that same kind of scrutiny had been applied to San Onofre. So Jeff made that connection. I'm not even sure the investigators knew what the RSG notes were, but we did a story that sort of...
And it was a secret meeting where they kind of had this deal. But even at that, even with the secret meeting, and we've talked about that, and you guys have done a great job with a lot of stories on that, but the consumer advocates at the time did sign off on the thing now. But this whole settlement now is going to be reopened, as we said, and we're going to see new scrutiny of this.
Yeah, TURN, the Utility Reform Network, and the state's Office of Ratepayer Advocates, they were both parties to the settlement and stuck with it for a while. But as more revelations came out about secret meetings and Edison was sort of forced to make a series of disclosures of meetings they had that other parties to the settlement were not privy to. So over time, TURN came out against it, the Office of Ratepayer Advocates did, and now finally the PUC itself.
So a lot of fish rot in that. Amitha, I wanted to turn to you. You've done a lot of reporting on this. What did consumer attorney like Micah Geary, the former city attorney, what do they have to say about the original deal here?
Oh, well, it was an illegitimate deal because it was basically reached in secret in Poland back in March of 2013.
And not a good deal for consumers.
No, I mean, it stuck ratepayers with a $3.3 billion bill. My question, though, is what's your sense about the legitimacy of the PUC to even reopen this? I mean, it has such a massive black mark against it. So when it takes a step to reopen such a big issue, what kind of standing does it have in anyone's eyes?
Well, that's a good question. I mean, the PUC itself, they have an interesting bureaucratic structure. They had a judge who was assigned to the case, Melanie Darling.
She's retired.
Sure you know. Well, they took her off the case, and her retirement was right about the same time. I don't know how much that was all connected. But when they took her off the case and put someone new on it, I think around December, and at the time I thought, well, are they really going to take a fresh look at this? And it does look like they have. A lot of people believe the PUC is still corrupt and has not fully reformed, if reformed at all. I think Michael Picker and his people there would tell you, they've made some serious efforts at reform since he took over in January of 2015. This may be a sign of blossoming reform at the PUC, but I think it'll be an important test of how much they are or are not still cozy with the utilities, because the utilities believe this is a reasonable, fair deal, and they said all along it should stay in place.
Yeah, no, that's my question. How do they defend that deal?
But can they keep the deal if the major ratepayer groups, well, TURN has withdrawn its support.
Yeah.
The Division of Ratepayer Advocates, or the Office of Ratepayer Advocates, has withdrawn its support. So what kind of settlement is it if you don't have the support
the parties,
of the other side?
Right. Well, I mean, if you're in a land deal, once it closes, it closes. I mean, if 6 months later the parties decide they didn't like the deal, well, it's too late. So for a long time it held together. Obviously the withdrawing of support by these people created enough political pressure to cause them to reopen the deal. But, there were a lot of statements made.
What does reopening it mean?
Yeah, why do consumers
like?
have to be on the hook for so much when it was a utility and their supplier of this faulty cooling system that screwed up in the first place?
Well, at least we might know this time why they have to be on the hook instead of it being negotiated in some bar in Poland. I mean, at least now they will get a chance to.
So you think transparency will go a long way here, Morgan?
Yeah. Like when they say they're going to reopen it, what does that mean? Like, are they going to have hearings?
They're supposed to make their decisions based on the public record, okay, and only the public record. And the fact that there were all these private meetings makes it look like maybe they didn't approve it with consideration of the record, right? So I think at some point it necessitates that they take another look at it. What will be the outcome be? I don't know. And in fact, several of these groups who stood by the deal for months and months and months said, when we would ask them, they said, well, you might want to reopen it, but that could actually end up in a worse deal for ratepayers.
Well, we're going to see what deal we wind up with because we have run out of time. I'm sure there'll be a lot more reporting on this. Thank you. That does wrap up another week of stories at the KPBS Roundtable. I'd like to thank my guests, Morgan Cook of the San Diego Union Tribune, Amitha Sharma of KPBS News, and Ricky Young, also of the Union Tribune. A reminder, all the stories we discussed today are available on our website, kpbs.org. I'm Mark Sauer. Thanks for joining us today on the Roundtable.